Honour is the External Affairs Minister of India, the Honourable Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. Dr. Jaishankar was born in Delhi and was educated at St. Stephen's College and Jawaharlal Nehru University. He then joined the Foreign Service and served abroad in Moscow, Sri Lanka, Budapest and Tokyo, and then as ambassador to the Czech Republic, High Commissioner, ambassador to China and to the USA. He was appointed Minister of External Affairs in 2019, their equivalent of the Foreign Secretary. His achievements in office to date have been numerous, from the negotiation of the civil nuclear deal with the USA, the establishment of the Quad, border negotiations with China, and deepening ties with a range of countries in India's neighbourhood and beyond to partners such as Japan. Dr. Jaishankar has been a formidable chief diplomat. Dr. Jaishankar will be in conversation with Lionel Barber, a veteran journalist who was editor of the Financial Times from 2005 to 2020. He has interviewed a range of global figures from Barack Obama, Vladimir Putin, Angela Merkel, and David Cameron. I'm sure we can all look forward to a fascinating evening. Thank you.
May I say, first of all, it's a real pleasure to conduct this conversation. Thank you, Wilton Park. Thank you, High Commissioner. I thought I could start with what I loosely describe as Tully's dictum, which is whatever you hear or say about India, the opposite is equally true. But it has become almost conventional wisdom to say that this is India's moment. There seems to be a political tailwind as well as an economic tailwind, a rare combination of circumstances. I think of Margaret Thatcher, political tailwind, economic headwind. But also, India seems to find itself in a geopolitical sweet spot between East and West. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about how India suddenly appears to be top of the heap. And then how is India going to exploit that position?
Well, first of all, let me join you in saying Wilton Park. Thank you very much for having both of us over. To your question, Lionel, I would say rather than say it's a moment, I would say there's a momentum because there's a certain process which we are in the middle of at this point of time. And there are different aspects to it. I think there's a whole domestic side where there have been really very sweeping reforms. And a lot of the hard work and efforts of the last decade, they are beginning to show up in terms of performance. It could range from how we handled the COVID to the economic changes which were made, the recapitalization of banks, the effort to boost exports, the renewed business confidence, but also very much the socio-economic changes. The fact that there's been such a massive embrace of digital technology. So one part of that momentum is the impetus given by domestic changes. Another part is really looking at the world and reading it right, trying to navigate the big contradictions and exploit the big opportunities of our time, restructuring our own neighborhood, building a certain, I would say, a record in terms of a contributor to global requirements, and certainly a good, solid economic performance at home has also worked well abroad. There's a dynamic there. So you can say easier to do business means you clearly get today the highest ever FDI levels that we've been getting. The de-bureaucratizing of the society, what we call ease of living, I think that's helping in many ways. Certainly, digital has been very useful in improving the quality of governance. The infrastructure, there's a much more integrated approach to infrastructure. And then finally, I think there is a cultural, historical, civilization side of India. I think you have a political party in power, you have a prime minister in power who certainly believes that the rise of India is not just another country rising, but that we carry with us a certain, I would say, weight of history and experience which comes from that. And there's a lot that our traditions and culture can really contribute to the global discussion.
And I'm going to come to that, as well as that rather interesting phrase you used about restructuring the neighborhood. But if we just look at the bigger picture, Minister, I think it's fair to say that there is a growing dichotomy, not just between East and West, but also between the developed world and the developing world. And there's a search for viable alternatives. You talked about India not being anti-Western, but non-Western.
Yes.
You're also in a number of groups, different groups, the BRICS, for example. How do you see India's role in trying to either reform the post-1945 global institutions of governance or building alternatives?
You know, in a sense, we are partly revolutionary, partly evolutionary. You want change, but you want a change in without an excessive disruption. So if you ask, let's take this aspect of your observation, how do you change the 1945 world order? You know, when you advocate a reform of the UN, that's one way of trying to change it. But if I give you actual change that has happened, to me, the fact that you have an institution like a group like the G20 is a very powerful statement of that change. Till 2008, I would say the really influential global grouping was the G7. The G7 still continues, the G7 still matters, but clearly there was a recognition after the 2008 crisis that the G7 membership was not good enough or broad enough to address the crisis, and you needed a buy-in by what we term the emerging economies. So, you know, it could be economic, it could be in power terms, it could be, you know, we do a lot of first responder operations today. I mean, we know in our part of the world, from East Africa probably till the Pacific, that if something catastrophic happens, it is for the countries of the region to respond. And 20 years ago, we would have waited for the United States to do something, which they did in 2004 when the tsunami came. So it could even be cricket, by moving the center of gravity of the cricketing world to India. That is also part of changing the 1945 order.
Yeah, we're feeling it, but there we are. I'm going to do something really dangerous, Minister, which is actually a quote from your book, which I haven't finished, but I did give it a good try over the weekend. It's very eloquent, very, very thoughtful book on international relations and the India way. You write at one point, it's only through a series of disruptions that India was able to bring about shifts in its favor. Now, you're referring there to 65 and 71, I think, Bangladesh, Pakistan war, perhaps. But is that something that you think you, with Prime Minister Modi, are attempting to do now? Some a series of disruptions? And if so, what?
You know, in my previous remark, I used the adjective excessive disruption. So even disruptions need to be managed and handled with a certain amount of skill. But the answer is yes. You know, when I used, I mean, I'm not exactly sure where I used that term in the book, but certainly, I trust you. So, you know, 1971 was a disruption in the sense what it did was it took a partitioned subcontinent and brought out the untenability of the outcome of the partition and really created a different construct in the subcontinent, which of course continues to this day. And interestingly, you know, what was then the poorer part, the less developed part of Pakistan has actually done much better economically. But there are other disruptions. In a sense, becoming a nuclear power was a disruption of a kind. In many ways, the reworking of our relationships, the fact that we have today built such a strong relationship with the Quad and with the US, and then which eventually has led also to the Quad, is another aspect of it. So what will happen to a country like India would be, as we go up the hierarchy, we'll have to, you know, some of it will be, as I said, more evolutionary, but sometimes we'll have to take some big calls, which, you know, which...
What do you think the biggest call is?
You know, I would find it hard to predict. I think there is a degree of, you know, you would react to what are the circumstances of that situation. So, but if you put them all together, it could, as I said, you know, it could be what we have done at home. The digitization of India is a very remarkable phenomenon. It could be what we have done in terms of shouldering responsibilities. Let's say if you take something like climate change today, there was a belief that we were a climate laggard. Today we're seen really as a climate action leader. I mean, a lot of the big ideas on how to deal with climate change are coming out of India. So there are a whole lot out there.
So I'm going to ask you about relations with China. We've got quite a few things to get through, but can you give us a quick update on progress on the Himalayan border dispute? But then a slightly bigger question, which is, do you believe that China can accept India as a peer in its Sino-centric view of the world? Does it matter?
Well, let me start with the first part of it, which is what's happening at the border. As you know, we had a border dispute pretty much from the time when they had the revolution and we got our independence. It took about a decade for this to really come out. You know, initially they were a bit evasive about it. Their maps depicted the border in terms of their claims, and they avoided, you know, engagement in the initial years. But by the second half of the 1950s, it was very clear to us that we had a very serious issue on our hands. And then in 1962, we had a border conflict, and they got the better of it. Now, from 1962, in fact, before the conflict, we had withdrawn our ambassador, and it was only in 1976 that we resumed ambassadorial relations. And it took another decade really for a Prime Minister of India to go to China and sit down and discuss the relationship with them. So in the 1990s, both countries made an effort to discuss the border, but stabilize the border while it was under discussion. And the arrangements we arrived at in the early 90s, in 93 and 96 specifically, lasted really till 2020. That there were very specific arrangements about not bringing large number of troops to the border, and then there were further agreements about what happens when patrols interact with each other. So from 1975 till 2020, there was actually no bloodshed on the border at all. But then we saw in 2020, for whatever reason, the Chinese did not continue to adhere to the agreement, and we had a big movement of troops to the line of actual control, and eventually there was a clash. Quite a few soldiers died. And what that has done is it has really vitiated the relationship. It has vitiated the relationship, one, in terms of bringing back memories of a conflict and of sharp differences. But it has also raised questions about a neighbor. When you say, when you have an agreement, it's important that agreements are kept to. And when that doesn't happen, that too has consequences in terms of credibility and trust.
So we're making some progress in the talks.
The talks there are places where, because we responded again by moving troops in very large numbers. So what happened was we ended up with a number of points where there is very close-up deployment of troops, which is fundamentally dangerous.
Yeah.
And our efforts since 2020, since September, I met Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Moscow in September of 2020. And we agreed, okay, let's find a way by which both of us go back to our traditional bases, so that we don't have that very close-up deployment and all the frictions that arise from it. Now, since September 2020, we have solved a number of these situations, but there are some which are still under discussion. Okay. So this is still a discussion going on.
So what about the bigger question?
Now the bigger question, there is a certain reality, which is the rise of China. There's an equal reality, the rise of India. The rise may be different, the time frame may be different, the quantitatively or qualitatively they may not be identical. But the fact is, as two countries who are really proximate neighbors, who are the two oldest civilizations of the world, who have survived as nation states, who are in a way exceptional nation states because they are civilizational ones. I think there are realities that need to be recognized, and perhaps each one of us has some tradition of how we look at the world, but traditions at the end of the day also have to take into account contemporary realities. I mean, I am today the fifth largest economy. I am the largest in terms of population. The impact that India would make on the stronger, fastest growing large economy of the world today. So those are realities that have to be factored in anybody's calculation, not just in China's.
So I'm going to come to Indian exceptionalism in just 1 minute, but can we just deal with Russia?
Okay.
And I was struck by how many times in this book you clearly didn't have an editor, but anyway, that's just a joke, ladies and gentlemen. But you...
Actually, I had one, a particularly bad one, and that was me.
Yeah, right. I do the same, by the way, but anyway. But you make a point several times about how remarkably stable over a number of years, back through the Soviet Union, relations between India and Russia, qua Soviet Union, have been. And that's remarkable, given, if you think about East-West relations, America-Russia relations, but particularly in the latter years, at least, of Vladimir Putin's reign. Now, not reign. That was a definite faux pas. yes, rule, the emperor. But India has not condemned unequivocally the invasion of Ukraine, and you're clearly not respecting Western sanctions regarding purchases of oil. Now, the issue is, I understand that you don't want to put Russia in the poodle position next to China. Is that part of your calculation, or is it actually, look, there's oil on the market at a certain place, this is a transaction, and we can play our options here? There's a lot there, I agree.
Yes. So let me start first with my repeated references to the exceptional steadiness of the relationship. I started my career, a diplomatic career in Moscow. There were very different times. I'm talking of the late 70s. And here's the fact that people need to think about. Let's look from the Second World War till today. The ups and downs in the relationship of the West with Russia. I use Russia and Soviet Union interchangeably. Okay. So there were your allies in the Second World War, there were your adversaries in the Cold War, there were some kind of friends after the Soviet Union broke up, the Yeltsin years particularly, even perhaps the early Putin years were years of great engagement, and then again things didn't go so well. So it's been up and down. Okay. In the case of Russia and China, they had a very strong relationship after the revolution in China in 1949. But by 1960s, the relationship had fallen apart. They even had a military clash in 1969, and it was bad enough for the Chinese to actually host American military sites which were targeting Russia at that point in the 1970s. Okay? So look at the ups and downs here. Now, I could, to different degrees, give you the ups and downs between Russia and Japan, Russia and Germany, Russia and pretty much everybody else. Comparatively, when I look back, we struggled perhaps in the late 40s, early 50s, but certainly after 1954-55, we've had the Khrushchev era, we had the Brezhnev era, you had the Gorbachev era, you had the Yeltsin period, the Putin period, back to the Putin period, and we've remained very steady. Now, I would like to believe that a lot of this is due to the brilliance of diplomats on both sides, but surely if a relationship is so even, there must be a fundamental structural ballast to it which would keep it so even. So my suggestion, my inference from that is actually both sides recognize the importance of the relationship in keeping a kind of a continental balance, if you would, in that part of the world. Now, I also make this point that when we, here I speak not just for India, when countries east of Russia view Russia, for us, Russia is a source of stability. Russia is not a revisionist power east of Russia.
It is west, though.
That might be your experience, or
I don't think I'm just wearing a Western hat on that.
No, but the contrast I would mark. But it is not automatic that if a country is perceived a certain way in the West, that logic would extend to the East. The perception in the East could be very different. In fact, it is very different. So I think when we approach Russia, because I'll come to the current situation, when we approach Russia, I think those 70 odd years of history and of working together and of what we call the steadiness is very much a factor in our minds. Now, when you then come to the Ukraine situation and what you asked me, look, I follow obviously and understand and analyze the position which European countries and Western countries have broadly taken in regard to Ukraine. But if we now make it a matter of, let us say, principle, which often is the case in many debates, my first experience of international relations when I became independent was I got attacked by Pakistan, and nobody condemned it. In fact, it went to the UN Security Council, and thanks to the United Kingdom, what began as a problem called, the aggression on Jammu and Kashmir, it ended up as the India-Pakistan question. So we have learned the hard way that people speak of principles. I don't say they are irrelevant or I wouldn't be cynical about it, but they are tempered by interests. And in this particular case, we have a very powerful interest to keep our relationship with Russia going. When it comes to the purchase of oil, just imagine for the moment, had we not bought oil from Russia, I think the global oil prices would have gone higher, because we would have gone into the same market, to the same suppliers that Europe would have done. And frankly, as we discovered, Europe would have outpriced us. We saw that in the LNG markets, where actually many supplies which were traditionally coming into Asia got diverted to Europe. And in fact, at least India was a big enough country to command some respect in the markets, but there were much smaller countries who didn't even get responses to their tender in Paris because the LNG suppliers were no longer interested in dealing with them. They had bigger fish to fry. So we've actually softened the oil markets and the gas markets through our purchase policies. We have, as a consequence, actually managed global inflation. So frankly, people should be saying
You'll be
thank
doing
you.
service.
Yes, absolutely. I'm waiting for the thank you.
Yeah. Merci.
I'll take it in any language.
Okay. I think I'm going to now do something even riskier. So you forgive me, which is to quote Martin Wolf, who is a great friend of India, as well as a former colleague at the Financial Times. And I've read his columns over many years on India. And as I say, he's a friend of India.
Yes, I know. I know him.
Yeah, I know you know him. Well, he wrote in a recent column that there's a paradox about modern India. He says modern India is less liberal, but more efficient. Interesting. I think you may or may not agree with this, but it seems to me that the India of today is very different from the India of the Nehru era.
I agree with that.
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, and this is encouraging,
Okay.
given what I'm going to ask you. But that in Nehru's time there was a formal entitlement to any religion. You talked about the weight of history, but in a way, secular, pluralist, not Hindu-centric or Hindu majoritarian as today. Now, we can get into the legal, what happened here in which state. I don't really want to go there. I'll just say I'm making this as a general political sort of philosophical. You referred to the weight of history and the new India. My question is, in this new Hindu-centric, Hindu majoritarian India that's projecting itself, how do you think that affects relations in the region, in the Gulf, for example, amongst Muslim countries? I tread lightly, I tread carefully here.
Yeah, but since you cleverly slipped in the word Hindu majoritarian as a description, I didn't quite see the inverted commas there.
Sorry.
Right. So I'll come back to that. Let me start with backwards, starting with your question and then going back to your assumptions. how are our relations with the Gulf, as an example, far better than they've ever been in our history. I would say it probably applies without exception in the Gulf. But certainly one recent example of this was the connectivity corridor, which we, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Americans, and the Europeans we have signed up to do. We concluded last year a free trade agreement with the UAE. The number of Indians in the Gulf today is the highest that it has ever been. There are more Indians in UAE and Saudi Arabia than there probably are in the UK. When we look at, it's not just energy, it's not, employment, the relationships with the various Gulf kingdoms have really deepened in terms of security, in terms of culture, in terms of what we do, in terms of connectivity. And again, not just the Gulf, it would apply to some degree for, as an example, to Egypt, where again our ties have been very enthusiastic of late. So the first point which we all might want to reflect on is whatever the changes in India, and I accept that there are, in fact, I not just accept, I assert that there are some very big changes which have taken place in India. Clearly, those changes are very well received in the Gulf.
In the majority. I see, sorry.
In the Gulf, in the Middle East, West Asia, as we call it. So that's the first thought, that these are apparently, from their perspective, positive changes. The second point, I go back here. Has India changed from the Nehruvian era? Absolutely, because one of the assumptions of that era, one of the a thought which very much guided the thinking of the polity and its projection abroad, was what we in India, the way we define secularism in India. And for us, secularism doesn't mean being non-religious. For us, secularism means equal respect to all faiths. Now, what happened in reality, in politics, was beginning with equal respect for all faiths. We actually got into a sort of a vote bank politics, a minoritarian pandering. And that, over a period of time, I think created a backlash. Mm-hmm. So a very powerful word in the Indian political debate is what is called appeasement, which is
We've got some track record on that too.
I'm speaking here only for myself. The direction in which politics went, I think more and more people started feeling that in a way, in the name of being equal, of equality of all religions, in fact, the biggest religion had to be self-deprecatory and play itself down. And I think, a big part, I think, of that community felt it was not being fair. So the changes we have seen, the political changes and the social changes we have seen in the last years have been partly at a intellectual level, a reaction, and a political level, a reaction to.
So do you think tolerance has gone down?
No, I don't think so. I think on the contrary, I think people today are less hypocritical about their beliefs, about their traditions, about their culture. I would say today, I think you used the word, what you said, Martin Wolf said, we are less liberal. I think,
and more efficient.
Yeah, well, that bits I take as a given. But I would say we are more Indian. We are more authentic. We are not Today, either currying favor before a global audience or really trying to live up to some kind of left-wing liberal construct, which a lot of Indians felt was not us.
Yeah. So I'm going to choose my words extremely carefully here. And I'll start with the word Canada and Trudeau. So take a glass of water. So do sip the water. I think I'm going to sip the water actually anyway. Obviously, this is a very serious subject because when you have a prime minister of a country the size of Canada that makes a public statement and raises an issue with a country and a government of the importance of India. Now, his words were a potential link. We may have identified a potential link between, and here I am going to use agents of India, and the killing of a Sikh separatist. So my first question is, very simply, is there any evidence that you've seen in the government that points to Indian government indirect or direct involvement with the killing of that Sikh?
In this case?
Yes.
No.
None. Do you believe he's a terrorist?
You know, he has a track record which is there in the social media. And that track record is a pretty graphic one. So I would leave everybody to make their judgment when, you know, about a person whose pictures are there with weapons, who has taken positions. I mean, the positions are not secret; they are very public positions. Yeah. But my response, you know, to what Prime Minister Trudeau said is that we have told the Canadians, look, I mean, first of all, because you got to understand the context. The context is that in Canada, we feel that the Canadian politics has given space to violent and extreme political opinions, which advocate separatism from India, including through violent means. And these people have been accommodated in Canadian politics. They are given the freedom to articulate their views. And not just that, it had come to a situation where the diplomats of my country, including the High Commissioner, we've had attacks on the High Commission, smoke bombs thrown at the High Commission. My Consul General and other diplomats were intimidated in public, on record, with no action taken by those who did this. You know, this is a country where there is a previous history. You know, for those who would be familiar with Lockerbie, we had a much bigger incident when an Air India plane, there were bombs put, in fact, on two planes. One fortunately landed before when the bomb went off, but the other one, there were 327 people who died when the plane crashed off Ireland. So given all this, I think it was important that, you know, a country like Canada, I mean, we are a democracy, we are a democracy, they are a democracy. But freedom of speech and freedom of expression also comes with a certain responsibility, and the misuse of those freedoms and the toleration of that misuse for political purposes would be, to our mind, very wrong. Now, in the case of Mr. Trudeau, I have discussed it also with my own counterpart. I still do, and we have told them, saying, look, if you have a reason to make such an allegation, please share the evidence with us. We are not ruling out an investigation and looking at anything which they may have to offer. They haven't done so.
Right. So I'm going to just ask you one other question on this, and then we've got a couple of others before we open it up. I had a conversation, I better not say who it was with, but it was a very senior and experienced, respected businessman from India about this matter. And he made a rather interesting point. He said, well, look, I mean, extraterritorial assassination, I mean, the Iranians have done it, the Russians have done it, the Americans have done it, the Israelis have done it, the Saudis have done it. So I'm not saying that we did do it, but if we did do it, I mean, we're just doing the same as everybody else of the big countries. What do you think of that?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I don't think this, I mean, I'm not disputing the long record that you read out. I could add a few other countries to it.
Oh, could you? Please. Would you mind just naming a couple?
No, I do practice diplomacy for a profession.
Yeah.
I'm not always suspected, but on balance, look, to me, that's not the logic which should be pursued in this day and age. If people do these things, to me, it does not justify necessarily that everybody should follow suit. I again, put it to you with a certain amount of responsibility of actually holding office. That if at any stage any country believes that they have reasons to suspect something like this, in fairness, they should present us with a reason.
Right. Okay.
So I would not justify it. I would look into it.
Good. I want to ask you two last questions. One is on America. We could talk for half an hour, both of us. You served there, I served there, not as a diplomat. I'd like you to comment on Bob Gates's article, which you may or may not have read, but certainly you'll be familiar with the argument. Can a divided America deter China and Russia?
Okay. I would say a divided America or a divided any country would obviously be a less effective player on the international scene. It's not necessarily a predicament which is specific to America. It matters more with America because America is the premier power of our times. But having looked certainly at the last few years, and there have been very strong, very bitter political debates in America. But I would say America has been actually in the last few years quite effective abroad in a variety of ways.
Well, I can't remember whether this was in the book or in one of your conversations in America with either Ken Jester, an old friend, or Walter Russell Mead, but you said something which really caught my eye, which is you referred to the American maritime presence in the Indo-Pacific, and you referred to the way they played a constructive, important, and pretty immediate role in the wake of the tsunami.
Right.
And you said in your comments, I'm not sure they could do the same today because they've drawn down. And I wondered whether that reflected a sort of view in the back of your mind, actually, America's sort of a relatively declining power.
No, I would say America today is a power which is reinventing itself. I don't think it's a power which is declining. And your memory is correct. I did say that in 2000, the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, the U.S. was the dominant naval force which came to the rescue. I'm not sure they do today because they do not deploy that many ships and they're not so based so proximately. So, but then I went on to say, therefore, the Americans have had the wisdom to realize the need to work with other partners. And in fact, it is this American openness today, which is shaping the Indo-Pacific, which has created a body like Quad. As someone who started working with the US almost 40 years, well, more than 40 years ago, I find
On the nuclear dossier, yeah.
No, on the relationship.
On the relationship.
And I find today the US is far more open, far more reasonable, far more flexible. They don't always,
Will that be the case in 2024 with Trump coming back?
We did 4 years of Trump, and we worked well with him.
You look well on it.
Yes. I put it this way. We appear to have figured out how to work with the Americans of all kinds.
Well, congratulations. I can't wait till 2020. Yeah, maybe you could tell some of them. I'm sure you raised that with Keir Starmer today. But anyway, let me just wrap up with a question. It's slightly a curveball here, but I started talking about India's moment. You talked about India's momentum. I'm sort of asking a rather journalistic question, which is, what could possibly go wrong? And I want to raise one issue, because you touched on this rather interestingly earlier, which is climate change. I was in the preparation for this, I read that with climate change, you could actually see maybe, because 10% of India's crop disappearing because of excessive temperatures and monsoon, to the point where India might even become a net food importer, which would be a really serious blow. But I mean, are you worried about that, or any other things that you think could halt that momentum?
I know we're tight on time, so let me just make two observations here. Yes, we do recognize today that the climate challenges are very serious, and it's important for countries to work, preempt a lot of what we can see coming. We have, in fact, today in the world factored in climate events as a regular disruptive happening, which is going to make the world a much more riskier place. Am I worried on the food side? Yes, as a government, as a country, we look at issues like the falling water tables, we look at the changing weather patterns, but we also are very active in finding solutions, and I'll give you one. We have been a very strong advocates of the growth and consumption of millets. Just to give you some kind of reference here, we grow a little less than 100 million tons of wheat every year, and we grow about 18 million tons of millet, so it's about 17-18% of the wheat consumption. Now, millets were our traditional grain. Very large parts of India historically ate millets. They're more nutritious, they're grown by small farmers, they're greener to grow, they use less water. And if we can, instead of having millets grown and consumed at the source of production with no value add, if we can actually make millets into a tradable grain, which is then processed, we think there's a whole world waiting out there, and in fact that is happening in India. And the Prime Minister Modi has made this in many ways a personal mission. And when I travel around, especially in Africa, I see great enthusiasm because they too eat millets even now. They too see that as an ancient grain, which is very much part of the tradition. It's more nutritious, by the way. So yes, if you sit on our hands and do nothing about it, a lot of what you fear may happen. I think the climate challenge, in fact, calls on us to be hyperactive in anticipating and responding to it.
We've got some time for questions, and I'm sorry, I probably went slightly over, so yes, ma'am. Could you identify who you are?
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Dia Chakraforty, I work for The Telegraph. Minister, that talk was every bit as fascinating as I was expecting it to be, so thank you very much, and thank you for conducting it. I was interested to read in your wonderful book, you say China had been winning without fighting while the US was fighting without winning in the lead up to the 2016 events of Trump winning and Brexit and all that. I agree with you that the US had been fighting but not winning, but I was surprised to hear you say that China hadn't been fighting. I mean, it had been fighting pretty openly. My limited knowledge at the border with India, it was within the WTO rules, but flouting them quite openly, I think, be it about causing disruption in its own region by funding North Korean conflicts. What did you mean by that?
One of the problems writing a book, it comes back to haunt you in different ways. I made this observation, if I remember right, in a very specific context, which is that the American military involvement in Afghanistan, and even more so in Iraq, has been hugely damaging to the United States strategically, and it's actually eroded their capacity as the premier power. So when I spoke about them fighting without winning, this whole concept of what they call forever wars, that you go in, you get stuck, you go in, you double down, you take over more responsibility, and then you get sucked in. That has in many ways been, from 2001, especially for the next 20 years, that has been very much a problem with which the United States has struggled with. Whereas in this very period, if you look, the Chinese actually did not have this kind of military commitment. And in fact, if one looks at the 2 decades after 9/11, there is clearly some correlation between the changed fortunes of the two countries and what the US focus on the Afghanistan, Iraq conflicts did was it actually in a way preoccupied the US and opened up many other parts of the world in a manner in which perhaps America regrets today. So that was my thought, that in a global way, America took its eyes off the ball.
Yeah. Yes.
Uday Kemka of the Sun Group, the Kemka Foundation. Minister, thank you very much for your very thoughtful comments, and also congratulations on everything the government's achieved and the recent G20. It's been extraordinary. My question picks up on the comment and the discussion you were having on climate change. You talked about being hyperactive. And it seems to me that broader, more than the commercial relationships that may underpin our foreign policy, could it be that handling what may be the greatest generational challenge of our times could bring us closer to our allies and also increase our economic development in terms of trade, investment, innovation, in ways that are much more specific than general free trade agreements? So, small illustration.
Okay, no.
Sorry, that's good enough.
No, that's all. You just got edited.
Yeah,
please.
so why don't I take 2, 3
Yes,
questions
exactly.
and just make it easier?
Next one. At the back, sorry. Yes. All right, hello.
Minister, Alec Russell from the FTX, one of Lionel's journalists. Most economists seem to think that in 5-10 years' time, there will be 3 economic superpowers. There will be China, America, and India. But when it comes to government of the global economy, India, it's not in the Security Council. It doesn't have a massive influence over the big multilateral bodies. How are you going to make up for that? How do you see India getting what I think a lot of people would reckon is its sort of rightful position in one of those bodies, or another one?
Good. I'll take one more, may I?
Yeah, one, I think, yeah, yes, sir. At the back, yeah.
James Crabtree, another former Barber worker. There have been recently some signs that India has been forging closer economic ties with Taiwan. There was reporting earlier this week that there would be a a deal in which Indian workers would move to Taiwan. There's greater cooperation in areas like semiconductors. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the future trajectory of relations between India and Taiwan. And in the event of a Chinese economic blockade of Taiwan, what would India's reaction be?
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood the first question. The first question was really, is an FTA, is a focused economic engagement a better way of handling problems? Is that what the question was?
Climate change could be better.
Create industrial corridors.
Yeah.
So we have industrial policy in the US,
Yes,
and India,
yes.
for example. Could we be much more coordinated? Industry, commerce, innovation, renewable energy.
Right.
And better than FTAs.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because today Europe is grappling with concerns about fossil fuel dependency and vulnerability. Perhaps there isn't today enough concern about the world when it comes to dependency and vulnerabilities, when it comes to renewables. More than what you are suggesting, my concern would be about over-concentrations. That we are looking at a global economy where in very critical areas there are concentrations, and those concentrations in different ways could be leveraged or could simply not be available in a crisis. I actually feel, especially because the climate events, one is the technologies you need to respond to climate challenges, but the other is the disruption which climate events will have on normal commerce in the world. And both actually warrant, to my mind, a kind of a re-globalization where the current economic concentrations are democratized, they are spread out more, so that you have many more production centers in the world. And I think that would make, frankly, for a much safer global economy. On that question, yes, you put your finger on it. I think we have a real challenge today that by not being in the Security Council, there is a lot in terms of global decision making that we have to find other ways of influencing and compensating for. There's no quick fix. I mean, I think we have to find ways of reforming the UN and other international bodies. My belief is that countries, those who are currently benefiting will fight those changes, will resist those changes. It's in the nature of things. But the pressure to change will grow with the passage of time. We can already see that happening. It could happen in the UN, it could happen in the WTO, it could happen in other international organizations as well. And the Taiwan question, we have substantial technology and economic and commercial relations with Taiwan. And certainly, Taiwan has a reputation when it comes to electronics and, of course, more recently with semiconductors. So there has been an upswing in the levels of cooperation. As to a hypothetical scenario that you raised, I don't do hypotheticals.
Good. We've got time for one last question. Jane, actually, the lady there, yeah, the back. All right, take two, but make it quick. We've got 3 minutes. One.
Thank you. I'm the High Commissioner of Bangladesh to the UK. And let me just pay a tribute to you, sir, because you're the first Indian Foreign Secretary who's become the Indian Foreign Minister. And quite an iconoclast diplomat in the South Asian perspective. Every South Asian diplomat wants to follow your career path in that way. So my question was regarding Bangladesh-India relations. And as you know, quite often I see that there's a lack of understanding on India-Bangladesh relations in the West, and particularly here in the UK. And as you know, last 2nd November, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina inaugurated the international India-Bangladesh railway links in Agartala, Akhara. I wanted to ask you that, how important or integral Bangladesh is in India's foreign policy, particularly in pursuing its security, regional connectivity, shared prosperity, and Indo-Pacific.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. One more minute, yeah, please.
Okay, I thought there was one more.
Oh, please. Okay, fine, because we've got to have some room for socializing.
All right. I think I used the word that we have tried to restructure the neighborhood. Now, obviously, it's not something unilateral by us. We have done it with the neighbors. Again, one of the big changes of the last decade, let's take Bangladesh. We have settled our land boundary with Bangladesh, which is really a very big deal. We had differences on our maritime boundary. We went for arbitration. We agreed that whatever was the arbitral award, we would both follow it, which we did when the arbitral award came, and a lot of it was not in our favor. So at the very least, it's a very good example to some other regions and countries who will remain unnamed. On the structural side today, in the last 10 years, we've had, the High Commissioner was referring to two rail lines between India and Bangladesh, which were inaugurated, a power plant which was inaugurated. Today, we are using Bangladeshi ports for our northeast. They are benefiting by more traffic coming through the ports. When our energy supplies on scale, because we import fuel, we refine it, Bangladesh gets benefited because there's a pipeline which supplies to them. So actually today, India-Bangladesh relations stand out in the Indian subcontinent as a model relationship in terms of benefits of regional cooperation.
UK-India trade deal before Mr. Sunak calls an election?
A lot of it is up to Mr. Sunak, isn't it?
That's all we wanted to hear. May I say that it's been a great honour and a privilege to engage in conversation with you, Minister. We did actually, I didn't say this, we did actually have an hour or more together when you were ambassador in Beijing. You kindly saw me and the Beijing Bureau Chief, Jamil Andolini, and I did make a note at the time. I wonder if I'll ever have another fascinating conversation like we had that day. I won't disclose it because it was off the record, but it was very, very interesting. So please join me in thanking the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar.
I'm giving this to